Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Christchurch Salisbury's Conversations About Life event for the evening. It's really good to see you with us. We're very pleased that so many of you have been able to make it and have joined us. My name is Mark Payne. I'm the pastor at Christchurch Salisbury, and I will be hosting the evening for you. A few introductory comments before we start and before I introduce Chris. Christchurch Salisbury is in the center of Salisbury. We're just around the corner from Culver Street car park. We meet at 10 a.m. on Sunday mornings, although obviously at the moment that happens virtually, not physically. But you can still get hold of us via our website or via YouTube, and our services are broadcast live. So we would love to see you with us. That would be absolutely wonderful. A word or two about this series. Conversations About Life is what it says on the tin, really. So it's really a series in which we introduce a number of topics which many people from whatever their worldview may be interested in. It addresses, for example, earlier this year, we had Professor Dawson speak on the topic of, has science made God redundant? Today, obviously, we have Chris Sinkinson speaking on the topic of archaeology. Later in the year, the latest by September, we will have Rory Steyn addressing his experience and his background with Nelson Mandela. Rory was the head of Nelson Mandela's security team and his lead bodyguard. And he, for example, accompanied Mandela on his visit to the UK. So I'm sure that'll be very interesting. That's an example of some of the events that we're hosting under this particular topic, under Conversations About Life. There are other events we have plan to have during the course of the year. We'll be taking a closer look at Christianity for those who would like to join. And the forum will be as relaxed and as friendly as these are typically designed to be. More information about all of the above will be sent to you in due course by email. For this evening, obviously, we have Chris presenting for us on the topic of digging for the truth, what archaeology shows about the history of the Bible. And we will then have an opportunity to ask questions. As I've said in the email, if you would take the opportunity then to send the questions in either by text message or via the link that was sent to you. I will remind you of those. It'll be put up on the screen as well. So you don't need to panic about finding it. And in the meantime, if you could jot those questions down, that would be great. You'll then be able to put those questions to Chris. So without any further ado, let me introduce Chris and let me ask him a few questions about his background, and then we can go from there. So Chris, can you hear us?
Good evening, Mark. Yes, I can and hear you and see quite a few of you on the screen as well. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. So for everybody, what I suggest you do actually is select Chris's screen, and then if you pin his screen, he will become like the main screen, and make sure you've got speaker view selected. So at least he will be large as life, or as large as he can be given the current context. So select speaker view, and the dots at the top right, click on that and pin video, and that'll keep his screen front and center. And I can float around the top somewhere. So Chris, thanks again very much for joining us this evening. It's really great to have you with us. For the sake of the people on the call who have joined us, it would be good to know a little bit about you. So something about your family, something about your background and your work.
Great. Well, yeah, thank you. So I'm married to my wife, Ros, and we've got two boys who, one of them is away at university, but of course during lockdown, he's back with us. So we've got a full house again. And always point out we've got a West Highland Terrier as well. And so he's part of the family, really. And yeah, I've been living in Alderholt, which is south of Salisbury, going down towards Bournemouth, for 18 years, 18 years, I guess now. So yeah, I've been in this part of the world for quite a while.
Great. So your background is, your academic background is primarily in theology and philosophy, and currently you're at Moorlands College. So yeah. Tell us a bit about the role there and what typically occupies you on a day-to-day when you're not sitting in front of a screen, of course.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is about the lockdown is that during this period, everything has kind of been business as usual in terms of we can port everything over onto an online environment. So we are still teaching and marking and doing tutorials and tutor groups, and we're all just doing it online. So a typical day might be 3 or 4 hours of lecturing, a couple of tutorials, and then usually marking. And actually marking is the dominant theme right now. So anyone who's a classroom teacher, I feel for you if you've got a marking to do.
So obviously your areas of specialism academically have been theology and philosophy. But you obviously have also developed a great interest in archaeology over the years. So how did that happen? And kind of bluntly, what qualifies you to be able to speak on the subject, I suppose?
Well, to be honest, my interest in archaeology predates anything else. I mean, I was interested in archaeology as a little boy. So before I became a Christian, I was interested in archaeology, and I wanted to be an archaeologist, as many young kids do. I worked for a while with, I did a sort of summer work with the Test Valley Archaeological Trust, not far from here, and I started a degree in archaeology. But I also became a Christian, and I just got more interested in theology and ideas and literature. And so I ended up not pursuing a degree in archaeology. I switched to, well, English and philosophy and then theology. And eventually I did doctoral study in theology. So it's more kind of like philosophy, theology is my academic background. And I teach in areas like Christian doctrine, which is a related area, and Old Testament as a biblical text. But the great thing for me, Mark, what I really love about teaching theology is it's allowed me to come full circle, because for my mind, if you love the Bible, you should love archaeology, because the Bible is full of historical information and background. And so it's allowed me over the years to get back into archaeology again. So I've been involved in a number of different archaeological projects. Et Tel in Galilee is, I've probably I think 5 seasons now I've been at Et Tel in Galilee, and that's something which has really helped me to just bring together a love for the Bible as real history, and a love for archaeology and what the material evidence shows. So you know, I mean, I'm not a professional archaeologist, but I'm involved with them. Just before all this lockdown came about, in fact, while it was all coming on, actually, while this virus was starting to creep up on us, back in, I guess it was late February, I was out in Israel, and we were actually doing a lot of filming with some of the archaeologists on various different sites around Israel. So we're in the midst of producing a film. And of course, then it all kind of like everything just shut down. And while we were out there, I mean, we got back before it had got too bad, though even then you could see there's a lot more kind of caution about people moving about. And so right now it's kind of like slightly stalled a film project that I'm involved in on archaeology in the Holy Land. But Mark, I also love archaeology in the UK. So yeah, I was involved last summer in a dig on a possible modest Roman villa in the New Forest, which is a whole new thing.
Great, thanks very much, Chris. So we'll hand it over to you now. I can give you a time check, kind of 10 minutes before the end of your slot, if you wish, if that'll be helpful, and we'll leave it to you. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you, Mark. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to project my PowerPoint slides up on the screen. What could possibly go wrong? So I think I will still appear in the corner somewhere. And I've got a few objects in my room, actually, that I might show you as well, but I may save that to like Q&A if they're relevant then. I'm not sure how good they'll look doing this on the screen. But I'm going to share screen now, and hopefully, not that one, this one, hopefully all is going to go well. Okay, so I tell you what, if you give me a thumbs up if you can see that slide, and hopefully administrators will tell me if there's anything wrong with the display or whatever. So let's think together tonight, very briefly actually. I mean, I've got hours and hours of material here that I'd love to share with you, but very briefly I want to think with you about this relationship between archaeology and the Bible. And you know, when we think about this theme, we're really in a world where there's a great deal of skepticism around. And you don't need me to tell you that the default position for many people is to consider this book legend or myth or fairy tale. And that's extremely significant, because by considering it as myth, and there's nothing wrong about myth in itself, okay, but by considering it myth, it is a way of neutering its power and challenge in terms of understanding of the real world. And what I want to share with you tonight is how archaeology brilliantly illuminates the Bible and shows how the biblical record, where it can be tested, and not everything can be tested, but where it can be tested, it demonstrates real credentials as real history. I'm going to be challenged tonight in terms of what I share, so I'm going to limit it to probably half a dozen things I'll have a chance to really talk about with you. And all of it is to illustrate this theme of how we can know that the Bible, in the light of archaeology, can be trusted and taken seriously as a historical record. So that's my plan this evening. Now, what is archaeology? Let's just start with this question. And like so many, I talked about when I was a child being interested in archaeology. It's this guy that was on the screens in the mid-80s, Indiana Jones, and of course the Raiders of the Lost Ark. There's no doubt about it. Indiana Jones inspired many people to have an interest in archaeology. And yet, sort of disappoint you maybe this evening, but actually the film has very little to do with archaeology at all. What Indiana Jones represents, and I love the film, I'm not knocking it as a film, but what Indiana Jones represents is treasure hunting, and it's the treasure hunting view of archaeology. You're out to find the shiny stuff. Archaeology isn't really about treasure hunting. 200 years ago, maybe it was, but as the years have gone by, archaeology has developed as a scientific discipline. It is still part of the humanities, but it is a discipline that uses the sciences to try to understand the past, not to just find treasure, but to find information. And that's why a lot of the most precious things found on a site have text associated with them. There's sometimes a little kind of dance that goes on a dig when something emerges from the ground that is particularly exciting or interesting. And what really causes the dancing isn't just shiny stuff. It's stuff that might have a fragment of text on it, letters, words, information, because this is what really helps us to understand the ancient world. So I'm afraid tonight, much as we might like to talk about Indiana Jones, we're going to leave that behind now, because we're going to enter the world of archaeology as a modern discipline. And archaeology is a modern discipline. As I say, it's a science. It uses sciences. I like to think of archaeologists as a bit like private investigators. They're carrying out an investigation. And in any kind of American detective film you might watch, one of the features of an investigator is they're always very cynical and very suspicious. And that's because it's part of the nature of the trade. You've got to be testing any sensational claim and see where the evidence leads. And many archaeologists are like that. I mean, archaeologists that I know, particularly out in the Holy Land, would be coming from a wide range of backgrounds. Christian or not Christian, atheist or agnostic, Jewish, all sorts of different backgrounds that they come from. Some are very skeptical and cynical, but all of them probably show some sense of that critical spirit of wanting to test the evidence. And what I find time and again, and at the end, maybe in the Q&A, I can point you to resources and writers and archaeologists and so on. Time and again, whatever our doubts and questions might be, the Bible demonstrates itself as a reliable record. Wherever it can be tested, it demonstrates reliability. Now, I'm going to share this with you tonight, particularly in the context of discoveries that relate to people in the Bible. Just to get us started, this is a headline from the Biblical Archaeological Review. The Biblical Archaeology Review is a secular journal. It's not trying to promote the Bible. It's a secular journal, but it concerns archaeology in and around the regions associated with the Bible. And they published an article a few years ago now called 50 Old Testament People Confirmed by Archaeology. So 50 different individuals that we know from the biblical record in the Old Testament, we're not even talking about the New, in the Old Testament have now been confirmed because of evidence directly from archaeology. Now that was 2014. In 2015, they had to do, in 2017, I think it was, 3 years later, there was an update in 2017 because archaeology had confirmed 3 more characters from the Old Testament record that we now know about from the archaeology outside the Bible. And I can tell you that's 2017, the numbers keep on growing. So even from last year, there's another 3 names, one of which is almost certainly a biblical character. I'm going to sometimes say things like almost certainly or probably, and that's because matters of history always involve probabilities. And so therefore we can't always be dogmatic, and particularly recent finds, things that have been found in the last couple of years. I always think it's very important to see beyond the sensationalist headlines and to just see what the the scholarship and so on will really demonstrate. So I'm going to share with you some very recent discoveries, but I'm also going to be very aware of sometimes the limitations of some of the recent discoveries in terms of our absolute certainty. But even so, it's looking good, because as every season passes, the numbers continue to grow. That's for the Old Testament, and a lot of what I'm going to share is Old Testament. But for the New Testament, there was a similar article published, and the numbers for the New Testament were 23. 23 different personalities that we know about in the New Testament, we now have confirmation for from the archaeology, from outside of the New Testament. Okay, so let's think about what all this signifies for us. And the big thing this signifies, you know, for me, is that when I read the Bible, I love this information because it brings it alive. I know that when I'm reading these ancient stories that I don't always understand and that sometimes I find confusing, I know that I'm reading about real people in real places, and there were real events. And it's this historical record written through the Bible that we can now demonstrate with archaeology. It's not that we needed archaeology, but we can demonstrate it through archaeology. I love reading literature generally, so I would love reading The Lord of the Rings. I would love reading Norse mythology. But this book, the Bible, is very different. It's something that Tolkien persuaded C.S. Lewis of. This book does not have the features of mythology or legend. It is rooted in real history. So let's think about this. And here on the side, I've got a number of different options, and I'm giving myself options. So I'm going to go as I feel tonight in terms of some of the things I want to share with you. So maybe I'm going to start actually with King David. Let's start with King David, because King David has been subject to a great deal of skepticism. Until the early 1990s, King David was an obvious character for legend. And then after the 1990s, discoveries started to be made that have basically meant that some of our theological textbooks are out of date. The claim that David was mere legend, like a kind of King Arthur figure, just does not stack up. The first object on the screen is the Moabite stone. This stone dates to about 840 BC, 840 BC. And it's from the Moabite nation. Now, the Moabites were enemies of the Israelites. And on this inscription is a reference that is almost certainly a reference to King David, 840 BC. So we're talking within 100 years of the time of King David. However, if you look at this stone, you may notice it looks pretty badly damaged. And there's a rather sad story behind this. This stone was found absolutely intact. By the way, tonight I'm going to talk about stelas. If I mention a stela or a stela, it's not a beer tonight, okay? A stela or a stela is one of these standing stones, like a gravestone, much the same kind of size. Now, this one's badly damaged. You can still see it's an early Hebrew script. It's what we call Paleo-Hebrew script. The damage that was done was not done by history or archaeology. It was done by the locals. So when this was found, they thought the archaeologists had found something with treasure inside. They thought there was gold inside. And so they stole it and smashed it to pieces to try and find any treasure inside. No treasure inside, of course, but it was left in fragments. It had to be reassembled, and from a wax rubbing, they had to restore the text. So sadly, badly damaged, but a very early reference to the house of King David. Now, because it's so damaged, there's a letter missing. In fact, the relevant letter D is missing. So though it's reconstructed as House of David, there is some uncertainty because the missing letter D in David. There's no other contender but David, but there may still be some doubt. However, that changed again because in 1993, we had the discovery of the Tel Dan stela, yet another direct reference to King David from the ancient world, from outside of the Bible. Now, the Tel Dan stela, it comes from a place called Dan, which is a town in the north of Israel. When I say a town, I mean an ancient town. It's a ruin now, it's a nature reserve. But it was a town in the ancient times where the Danites, one of the tribes of Israel, lived. And in a wall in 1993, an ancient wall, not a modern wall, in an ancient wall in 1993, archaeologists found in situ, in the building rubble that people had used nearly 3,000 years ago, the broken fragments of a stela, one of these standing stones. And on this Hebrew text, it's an Aramaic language, but it's an early Hebrew type of text. On this text, you notice there's a bit whited out in the PowerPoint slide. And the bit that's whited out is the bit you need to draw your attention to, because this standing stone has direct reference to the house of David. We can just zoom in on it. It says Beit David in this Aramaic text, Beit David, which means the house of David. And actually just above it, if you have Paleo-Hebrews up to it, you might notice the line above. The line above says Melech Israel, which means King of Israel. So you've got here on this standing stone actually a reference to the King of Israel and the dynasty, the house of King David. Both on the same stone, and we're talking about the century after the time in which he lived. You see, since 1993, no one seriously denies the existence of King David. He is not legend. He is not myth. I mean, there will be those who will debate whether he had as an extensive a kingdom as the Bible says. They'll doubt some of the stories of the Bible. But the existence of King David is now right back in the frame of real history. And it's the archaeological record that has added confirmation to this. Very recent find actually has been made at a place called Khirbet Qeiyafa. Now this is not far from Jerusalem. Look, bear with me with these photos and maps, you know, because I'm feeling a little bit of cabin fever. I don't know about you, so maybe let's get these wide open horizons of the expansive land of Israel. And if you look at the map, it's where it says KH Qeiyafa, if you can see it on your screen. Pity anybody using a mobile phone for this. But Khirbet Qeiyafa is quite a small, about 6-acre town, abandoned town. When I say town again, I mean ancient town, Old Testament times. And not a lot of work had been done there until just the last few years. And an archaeologist called Josef Garfinkel has been excavating there. And what he has found, and literally, I was talking to him in February, and literally in February, like the week before, they had just found things that suddenly made the headlines, because there is real confirmation here, very clear confirmation. This is a fortified town from the time not only of David, but of King Saul. So it's an Israelite town that seems to have confirmation of the monarchy at the time of King Saul. That's very early, by the way. We're talking about 3,000 years ago. What's been found at Khirbet Qeiyafa, we're not far from Jerusalem as we look at this satellite view. You can see it's quite nicely inked out what's been found, because I know sometimes when you show these pictures, everybody says, it looks like a pile of rocks. I mean, it is a pile of rocks, but there's meaning to it. And there's architecture here. And the architecture is really significant, because this is a town that's right on the border of the area that was controlled by the Philistines and the area of the Israelites. And at this location, it's a fortified town. There's some really interesting material that's come from here. The gateway that you can see, which is in purple, that would have been the gate, the entrance into this little fortified town. It's oriented towards Jerusalem. And that's interesting, because people had imagined this was probably Philistine, but they would have oriented their gateway towards the west, the Mediterranean. But this gateway is oriented towards Jerusalem, towards the east. This is the furthest west that at the time of Saul and David, they could establish a kind of a frontier against the Philistines. And what's emerged? One of the things we look for in an archaeological site, we have little bags to put different things in, or buckets, depending on how much money you got. And one of the things we look for are animal bones. Animal bones are really interesting because they tell you a lot about the diet of the people who live there. And there's a very distinctive feature emerging all across the central mountains of Israel. And that is, at sites like here at Khirbet Qeiyafa, there are next to no pig bones. Pig bones common everywhere else. The Philistines enjoyed bacon. They'd have had no problem with a bacon double cheeseburger. And so you find pig bones in the domestic remains of the Philistines. No pig bones here. There's Israelite culture from the time of King David at this frontier town. One of the most, this is one of the most intriguing finds from Khirbet Qeiyafa. We don't yet know exactly what it means. What we do know, this is a pottery shard. When you're a broken bit of pottery, pottery is all over the place. It's the most common thing found on an archaeological site. And when you find a bit of pottery, often it's just broken pottery, and it tells you a little bit about the dating of the site, but not much more. Occasionally, someone will write something. Someone will write text on a pottery shard. And then it's no longer a pottery shard. It's what we call an ostrakon. And an ostrakon is incredibly valuable because you've got text, information. And all sorts of things are being found in terms of written documents on ostraka, written down on bits of broken pottery. They're like post-it notes of the ancient world. Well, what you're looking at on the screen is the one from Khirbet Qeiyafa, and it's the earliest example. Now, nobody knows for sure, nobody can be absolutely certain what it means. It's got paleo, very early Hebrew text. So we're talking about a text that will go back to the time of King Saul or even earlier. There seems to be a reference here to the coronation of a king. That's the best way of reconstructing it. It's very difficult to understand it yet. It's still being worked on, but the excavators at Quebec-Caefa think this is a good contender for being a message that's very early in terms of Israel's history, late time of the judges, time of Gideon and Samson and so on. And it's a message that's concerning the coronation of a king. Who could that be? Could it be Saul? Could it even be earlier than that? And the attempt to crown a king called Abimelech in Judges 9. So these are some of the very recent finds from Quebec-Caefa, and it all points to this period of David and a united monarchy. And this is material that's emerging from the ground. Even while I speak, I could say, I mean, Israel's kind of like coming out of lockdown now. It's slightly ahead of us. So I think I can genuinely say, even as I speak. So something of David. Now I'm going to just be aware of my time, because I do have this habit of going on a little longer than I intend to. So I'm picking my way fairly carefully through my material here. Let's go a little bit more recently, and then we'll go back in time. So we'll do it this way around. Let's come a little bit more recently in Israel's history, because this is a stunning find, which you can freely see at the British Museum. So you don't need to get on a plane to Israel to see this one. And this is an astonishing find. Henry Austin Layard was out at Nineveh. He was one of our antiquarians, we'd call them, back in the 1800s. He's buried actually not far from us. Those who are on the Zoom link from the local area, Salisbury, you can head down to Wimborne and go and have a look at the grave of Henry Austin Layard, his tomb. And you'll see on his tomb not only that he was a member of Parliament, but he was the discoverer of Nineveh. Now there's a gravestone. That's a gravestone that I would like to have had, the discoverer of Nineveh. And in his discoveries, he made a number of astonishing finds. And because of the British Empire at the time, many of them found their way back to London, where they've been very faithfully preserved at the British Museum. And this one for me is such a stunning discovery from Nineveh. So we're talking about the 19th century when this was found, and it's called the Black Obelisk of Shalmaneser III. Shalmaneser III is an Assyrian king, not an Israelite. And this standing stone is a monument that testifies to other people who are coming to bring him tribute. So there are peoples from other surrounding lands who are coming to pay homage, pay taxes really in our money, to pay taxes to this Assyrian king. And on the second panel down, I'm going to just zoom in on the second panel down. These are called registers, these cubes. You'll see there's a figure bowing down, and there is a matching panel, rectangular panel working its way around this obelisk, which has the people who come with him, his fellow compatriots. And if you see the scratchings underneath, this is called cuneiform. This is the text. I said text is really valuable. And the text here is telling us what's going on. And what is going on is here you have the nearest thing to a photograph of an ancient Israelite king, because this is King Jehu and the Israelites coming to pay homage to the king of Assyria. It's around 840 BC. So we're going way back now in time. So we're talking, 2,840 years ago. And we're not just talking about names of people from the Bible. We're talking about the nearest thing to a photograph of a person from the Bible, recorded in ancient history. And notice, by the way, with a lot of this archaeological evidence, it's from enemies of the people of God. It's from the Moabites, it's from the Arameans, it's from the Assyrians. Enemies recording what they had done, which in the providence of God or the providence of history has meant that we have had preserved these records of these people from outside of the biblical text. Black Obelisk of Shalmaneser III. It's a stunning thing to go and see up at the British Museum if you've got time. Let's have a look at Jerusalem. Okay, so I can show you a few more of how the names work, because the names are always very interesting, I think, and how this works. Jerusalem, here we are, the Temple Mount, the most fought over piece of real estate in the entire world, and tension always runs high. Archaeology is not allowed on the Temple Mount, this enclosed area with the Golden Dome. The Golden Dome is a very beautiful building, I think. It's not a mosque, by the way. It's an Islamic holy place, but it's not a mosque. Almost certainly, for reasons I can't go into with you right now, it's almost certainly marking the position of the temple. So we're talking about Solomon's temple and then Herod's rebuilt temple at the time of Jesus. That golden cupola almost certainly marks where the Holy of Holies would have been. Now, I've got no time to explain that, But what do we know of the existence of the temples? What do we know of Solomon? And what do we know of this whole Old Testament period? It's a problem partly because of the politics. And that means, like I say, you can't do any archaeology on this Temple Mount. You can't even talk about it being the Temple Mount. If you walk around and too loudly describe it as the Temple Mount, you are likely to be forcibly removed. Naively, when I used to go up there, I used to walk around with a Bible and I used to walk around with an archaeological guidebook, and they really don't like it. So there's an attempt to change the name. It's the noble enclosure, and really to not refer to the Jewish Old Testament and, of course, New Testament history of the site. So do we hold our hands up in despair? No, we don't, because there's an awful lot being done around the edges. And that includes some really remarkable work, which is revealed to us just very recently. In fact, one of the seals I mentioned, let me just say what a seal is. A seal, okay, is nothing to do with penguins. It is a stamp that would bear a name. They're relatively common in the ancient world. I mean, they're quite valuable things, but just to give you a sense of scale. So these are some seals, and these will be just to be really clear here, a seal is a precious stone which will have a name, an identity, or a message, and it will be stamped into clay. And what you're actually looking at here are the clay impressions. These are called bula. And the clay impressions are what's left behind once the stone has been stamped in the clay. And there are many different names of Old Testament characters that we know about through these bula and the seals themselves, which are sometimes found. Now, a stunning one was found just recently. The map shows, I don't want to break anything over here, all these priceless objects, you'll see them clatter down behind me. What the map shows behind me is, not a map, a photo shows behind me, is the Temple Mount, and there is the mosque, by the way. So I said the Golden Dome is not a mosque, but you've got the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is the grey dome. And then just to the left of it, you see the archaeological excavations going on all around the edge. All of it exposing the city from the time of Jesus and then going back into the time of the Old Testament world, back to David and even beyond. Now, there's been a number of these seals that have been found. In fact, there's a whole, where there's a red arrow you can see on the screen, there was a whole collection of these found just a few years ago, and it's taken quite a while to sort and sift and so on. And this collection all belong to the same period. And we know very clearly the period they belong to. They belong to the period of King Hezekiah. And one of the bula found, you see it's a clay impression, it bears the name of Hezekiah in this early Hebrew script. So you've got Hezekiah's own personal seal. This isn't the first time a Hezekiah seal has been found, but usually they turn up on the black market, and so nobody's quite sure how legit they are. But this one was found on an archaeological site, so we know it's very much legitimate. It's got good provenance. So Hezekiah is well attested to in the archaeological record. There's no reason at all to doubt Hezekiah, so we've got information. But this cache, this collection of bula, not only has got Hezekiah's, they also found a broken one, just 3 feet away from where the Hezekiah one was found. And this is really astonishing. Elliot Matsar, who found this, it's broken in half, and that's going to be a slight issue here. But the text we have on here tells us that this is the bula, the stamp of a seal belonging to Isaiah. And it also has the Hebrew word prophet. There on the text that you're looking at, Isaiah prophet. Now, can we be absolutely sure that is the imprint of Isaiah the prophet? Well, we can't be absolutely sure, and there's 2 reasons why we can't be absolutely sure. Number one, there's a bit missing, and bits missing always raise the suspicions of archaeologists, okay, because they are like those hardened private investigators. They want to be sure. So there's a bit missing. Secondly, you wouldn't normally refer to yourself as prophet on a seal. Normally it would be son of. So normally what you'd expect to have is Isaiah the son of, and that's why it's unusual to have the word, a word that could be reconstructed as prophet on this seal. Nonetheless, this is what the Matsar, the archaeologist excavating here, has said. There's no other contender. The text fits, the date fits, the location fits. There is no other contender than Isaiah the prophet as the owner, the personal owner of this seal that's left its impression in the clay to be found just 2-3 years ago there at the edge of the Temple Mount. another biblical character. That's not one of the 53, by the way. That would be an additional one. It's not added on because of the bit that's missing. So let's go to another location and continue this kind of fleshing out the story. Let's go back then in time. Let's go back to Moses. And I like this one because when we turn back the clock to Moses, I just want to tell you a few things about some problems in archaeology that are really played upon by this kind of skeptical media. You will hear it said that there is no archaeological evidence for Moses and the Exodus. And the claim will be made, well, if there was such a great event, we've got all of these records from the Egyptians, they would have recorded the defeat of their chariots and so on in the Red Sea. They would have recorded the escape of the Israelites and so on, and Moses would appear in the record. Now, this is nonsense. History is not like that. History is selective, and the Egyptians were masters at selective history. If we've got time, I could share with you there's some quite funny anecdotes actually of just how selective they were in what they recorded. In other words, they only wanted to record what they wanted remembered, and there is no way they would want to record the events surrounding the Exodus. Instead, what we find in the ancient world is the smoking gun. We find evidence upon evidence for the presence of the Semitic people, that's all they're going to be called at this stage, Semitic people in Egypt at the relevant time. So we have inscriptions showing the arrival of Semitic people during the time of the patriarchs, and this would go back to 1800 BC. We've got reference to Semitic people being used as slaves in Egypt a little bit later on in their history. And then we've got evidence that ties in with this biblical record of an enormous impact on ancient Egypt's history. There's a period called the monotheistic heresy in Egypt. I don't know whether you've heard of this, but in the 14th century BC, the Egyptians imposed monotheism on their people. They abolished the worship of many gods and imposed the worship of one god. No Egyptologist can really explain where this came from. It's a great mystery. It's called the Amarna heresy in Egyptian history. But it fits remarkably well in the wake of the Exodus. And then what about the names? We have a number of names actually in the book of Genesis that are Egyptian names. We sometimes miss that. The name Moses, for example. The name Moses is not a Hebrew name. You don't get lots of Moseses in the Old Testament because it's not a Hebrew name. It's not a Hebrew word. It sounds like to draw out in Hebrew. So there's a play on words when they draw out the baby from the water. They give him the name that has this play on words as draw out. But as a personal name, it is an Egyptian name. You find the name in names like Ramesses and Thutmoses. In other words, it's a royal name meaning born of, and it's part of the Egyptian culture. There are many features like this in the book of Genesis and Exodus that demonstrate this authenticity about the account. But what about the archaeology? That's what you're here for tonight. What does the archaeology show? Well, Flinders Petrie, we need to listen to. Flinders Petrie was a British archaeologist, and he was one of those child prodigies. He could speak many languages as a very young child. And it's really Flinders Petrie who we owe an enormous amount to in terms of the development of archaeology as a discipline, as a science. All right, let me just share with you a quick anecdote about Flinders Petrie. Petrie realised, and this is in the late 1800s, Petrie realised there's a problem in archaeology. You go to these sites as a wealthy Englishman, or woman, but men generally in those times. You go to these sites and you employ the locals to do all the backbreaking work in the dry desert sun. So there they are in Egypt. He's under his umbrella shade, cataloguing the finds, and there are all these hard-working local Arabs doing the backbreaking work of digging in the sand and finding all the things. And Petrie noticed something really odd. They would find architecture, they would find pillars and statues, but they never found much of the really beautiful little stuff. They weren't finding the little statuettes and coins. They weren't finding little inscriptions, tablets. Instead, while they were busy doing the archaeology, the black market down the road in Cairo or Thebes was getting flooded with all sorts of relics that were appearing out of nowhere on the black market. Petrie realized the problem was these workers who were being employed on $1 a day or whatever the equivalent would be, on $1 a day, when they found something valuable, they just went and sold it. They slipped it in their pockets and ferreted it away. So Petrie did a deal with his workers. He called them all together and said, work for me and I'll pay you $1 a day. But also at the end of the day, bring to me everything you found and I'll pay you the market price. And that simple idea actually was extremely important for the development of archaeology. It put archaeology on a much surer footing in terms of recording the finds. And it's to Flinders Petrie we owe this. It's the find of his lifetime. And it's one of the most significant finds in terms of understanding where Israel came from. This is called the Merneptah Stela. Pharaoh Merneptah, dating to around 1210 BC. Okay, 1210 BC. In terms of the Bible dates, by the way, that would be roughly the time just after the period of the Exodus and the wilderness wandering as the Israelites were settling in the land. We're talking about the book of Judges in terms of the Bible. By now, the Egyptian text could be read, and Petrie could read it even as the sand came away. And as he read the text, he realized he'd found this stunning find, which would reveal to us an awful lot actually about ancient history, but something very significant for the Bible. What we've got here is it's a campaign of Pharaoh Merneptah. Pharaoh Merneptah was quite some time after the Exodus, by the way, so we're a couple hundred years after. Pharaoh Merneptah led a campaign of his military all across North Africa and up into Canaan and up as far as Syria. And he catalogued the different cities he destroyed and the people that he vanquished. It's a bit like a holiday postcard, but very heavy and very violent. And it keeps a record of this military conquest around the land. A lot of it's propaganda. We know that cities he claimed to destroy weren't always destroyed, so we know that there's a lot of propaganda, but it's this reference that's highlighted on the screen that is the stunning reference. This is a reference to Israel. It's the earliest reference to Israel outside of the Bible that's ever been found in complete form. There's a broken one that might be a bit earlier, but this is the earliest complete reference to Israel from outside of the Bible anywhere in the world. Dates around 1200 BC. And it's really interesting because in the Egyptian hieroglyphic system, there's a way of distinguishing between a city, a region, and a people. So if it's a city, you'll know that it's Hatzor or Dan or whatever. If it's a region, it'll be Libya or Syria. But this uses the particular form for a group of people. And in Egyptian, what it's saying is, I destroyed Israel, the people of Israel, their seed is no more. Now, it's pure propaganda. It's bravado. Of course, he didn't do it. But here we go again. It's an enemy of the Israelites recording their presence in the land of Canaan by 1200 BC. It tells us they're a distinct people group. They've got a distinctive identity. It tells us that they're not a place, and Israel was never a place in the ancient world. Israel is not a region or a territory. It is a group of people in the land of Canaan. And that really is our indicator that the Israelites genuinely are a people who had come out of Egypt. They were enemies of the Egyptians at this stage, and they were beginning their settlement of the land of Canaan that we'll now call the land of Israel. So this is the Merneptah Stela, and I'm keeping an eye on the time so I can judge, how much time I've got. Let me do one that I've been involved in, because I must get some New Testament in as well, but let me do one that I've been involved in. And no, not this one. I wasn't involved in this one. Oh no, let's do Jericho first, and then I'll do the one that I was involved in. I want to talk about Jericho with you because Jericho is one that often the skeptics will draw attention to. And they'll say the problem with Jericho is back in the 1930s, the first excavator there, a man called Garstang, he excavated and found the tumbled down walls associated with the Joshua conquest. And sorry, these grisly images appearing on the screen ought to explain first of all. In the excavations, Jericho is an absolutely stunning town. You might be looking away right now if you don't like these images. Some of these faces, reconstructed faces, they're in the British Museum actually, and they are very ancient. We're talking Stone Age remains. On the middle of the screen there, this is at the site of Jericho, you can see a stone pillar, and it's the oldest Stone Age pillar found anywhere in the world. You see, Jericho is the oldest city in the world, the oldest continuously occupied city in the entire world. It's the lowest level city as well, found anywhere in the world. It's a very significant city for global history, Jericho. So much centers on Jericho in terms of what we call the Neolithic, the very, very ancient history, as well as biblical history. And so you've got layers at Jericho that tell you about all sorts of periods of human civilization and development. And Isaac Garstang is the man in the 1930s who excavated Jericho and said, lo and behold, there are fallen walls that fit with the Joshua conquest. And then Kathleen Kenyon arrived. And in 1958, Kathleen Kenyon excavated at Jericho. She's on the screen there, examining some of these gruesome looking face images that you can see. And Kathleen Kenyon said, no, the dates are wrong. She puts the date of the destroyed walls, which are there. Nobody's questioning the destruction of the walls of Jericho, but she puts the date of this destruction layer to around 1550 BC, which is too early for the Joshua conquest. And therefore, since 1958, Jericho is now part of the West Bank, Palestinian West Bank. It's not subject to the same level of archaeological excavation. There are some work going on there, but nothing like what was going on years ago. It's quite a sad sight, actually, if you visit it today. And so that's kind of like end of story for many people, case closed. Kathleen Kenyon showed that Jericho is a ruin long before the Israelites got there, and there's no evidence for the Joshua conquest. Think again. There's been more recent work, and the more recent work, I'm not going to dwell on those. If you want to look up, if you're interested in Jericho, you can look up the work of Bryant Wood. Bryant Wood in the 1990s conducted a re-examination. And what you got to remember, okay, let me just tell you a few of the problems then in archaeology with Jericho as an example. Number one, I've described archaeology as a science, but actually when I started a degree in archaeology, it was in a humanities department. It was a BA in archaeology. And that means archaeology is part of the humanities. It uses scientific tools, but it is subject to human interpretation. And it's that human element that means there is always room for debate and so on. And so the arguments can go to and fro. And what's interesting is that in terms of an archaeological dig, you're only really talking about a very small percent of a location from which you will extrapolate your broader claims. Now, Kenyon, I think, was not far off the mark with 1500 BC, actually. And I think she had good reason for that. But she's probably out by about 100 years. Now, when you're talking about a 3,500 year event ago, an event 3,500 years ago, a plus minus 100 is not bad. And that's all you need to tie it in with the date of Joshua. And Bryant Wood has demonstrated that more recently with some of the things that were missed. Kathleen Kenyon only excavated in a particular section. In another section, there is the type of pottery that was in use in 1400 BC, and she'd missed it. And then even more significant, there are burial sites that have these precious stamps, these seals that I mentioned to you before, and they're on the screen. And you don't need to worry about all the dates and the names there, but the important point is these seals, these precious stones, bear the names of pharaohs, giving us a complete sequence that will take us through to the time of the Joshua conquest. In other words, Jericho was there when Joshua and the Israelites arrived, and the destroyed wall can be interpreted as in keeping with what we read in the biblical record. So this is more recent work that's done that questions some of the received wisdom from 60 or 70 years ago. Okay, I'm down to 9 minutes, and I do want to talk about something I've been involved in, and we ought to talk about Jesus as well. So let's see how we do. Let's go to the lost town of Bethsaida. So for a few seasons now, I've been involved at Et Tel is its official name. That just means the Tel, which in Arabic just means the hill. So it's the most boring name for a site, the hill. And part of the reason why it's called Et Tel is nobody knew what it was. Nobody knew what town this was. There was evidence for significant occupation here, but nobody was sure where this was. And the interesting thing is that we have a number of towns that are still missing, that we read about in the Bible, and we're still looking for. Where are some of these towns? One of the very important towns that was missing until the 1990s is the town of Bethsaida. Now, if you know the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you'll know that Bethsaida is actually a really important town in the Gospels. There's 3 really important towns around the Galilee for the ministry of Jesus: Chorazin, Capernaum, Bethsaida. We know Jesus spent a lot of his time in those towns around the Sea of Galilee. Well, Capernaum had been discovered, Chorazin, we know where that is, but Bethsaida was the missing town of the Gospels. And it was in the 1990s that an archaeologist called Rami Arav began excavations at this site. I love that picture, by the way, the sunshine falling here on the northern coast of the Sea of Galilee. And it's a beautiful site, this particular Et Tel, this hill. But it has a major problem in terms of relating it to the Gospels. And the big problem is it's a mile or so away from the sea. It's too far away from the sea. You know, Bethsaida in the Gospels is a fishing town. It's the hometown of Philip and Andrew. It's a fishing village. It's associated with Jesus walking on the water and calming the storm. So all these associations indicate it's got to be on the seafront. It won't. You can't have a fishing town that's a couple of miles from the sea. So Et Tel had been ignored until the archaeologist Rami Arav began to explore geologically the area. And what he found is that the coastline of the Sea of Galilee was different 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years ago, the shoreline was able to reach the location of this hill. And that was found in the 1990s. And that led on to extensive excavations of Et Tel that have revealed to us biblical Bethsaida. There's really not much reason to doubt that this is the Bethsaida of the Gospels. It's a major fishing town. It's got evidence for them. There's an anchor weight there in my hand. There's goods being imported and exported. There's fishing tackle. There's a coin sequence right on down through the period. Lots more that I could talk about relating to the New Testament. There is another location, by the way, just a little bit further down by the lake, which may be an associated site. It's called El Araj. So any of you who are really, really into this, you might find out about El Araj. And let me just say, that alternate site, there's no way it comes close to this site as the proper site for Bethsaida, but there might have been a connection between them. It had more of a Roman feel, that one. But anyway, here are some of the objects on the screen. They're all associated with the time of Jesus. And Bethsaida at the time of Jesus is now understood. We know the location. We've got lots of information now that helps us to demonstrate that we have the 99% candidate for Bethsaida. But that was not the site that, it's the site, but that's not the level that I've been interested in, because I teach Old Testament. So I've been more interested in the Old Testament level. And what you've got to remember at these locations is they built one on top of the other down through the years. So if you dig down below New Testament Bethsaida, you found another 2 or 3 cities down below. And the 2 or 3 cities down below all actually are really one city that just got rebuilt and rebuilt after an earthquake or after a battle. So essentially, this is, you know, as they used to do the bog-off deal, the buy one, get one free. This is the sort of archaeological equivalent of a bog-off deal, which is the find one, get one free. So they found biblical Bethsaida, that's come to light. And now we found another town. And this is the town that I've been involved in, which is Geshur. It is exactly the same location on the map, okay, but it's below it. So you've got to expose some of the New Testament town to get down to the Old Testament town. And this is the only contender for the capital city of the kingdom of Geshur. We know that this is Geshur, the region. It's from the word Geshur that we get the word Golan. So it's the region of Galilee and the Golan. And this is a major city. This is obviously a reconstruction of what it would have looked like. A major city from during the period, I mean, 800 BC, it would have been active. And this is the time now of the Old Testament period. And we read about Geshur in the Old Testament. You may not remember it, but it's a friendly ally of the Israelites. And so Geshur was functioning during the time of Israel. And really importantly, King David marries the daughter of the king of Geshur. And Absalom, his son, through that daughter, Absalom flees back and spends a couple of years back at Geshur in a sort of exile. So Geshur was a kind of friendly ally of the Israelites. And last summer we made the Jerusalem Post, and we made the news. This is the headline. It got international attention. Archaeologists identify city gate from the time of King David. Now, I know you may be saying to yourself with the picture on the screen, it looks like a pile of rocks, but as I've said to you, it's an interesting pile of rocks because that is architecture. And what you see there is a result of about 6 years' work, actually, exposing a city gate from the time of King David. And we've got very clear evidence that this was the gate that was functioning at the time of David. This is a gateway from a little bit later, from 800 BC, so it's up above. But as we go down below, we find this earlier gateway. And the linking point that makes this Geshur, and I am coming right towards the end now, so get your questions ready. But the linking point that we know this is Geshur is this gateway from 800 BC has a standing stone, stela, which marks it as the entrance. And the stela is here. It's in the Israel Museum now for safekeeping, but it has this kind of bull with a sword. And this is the logo of the kingdom of Geshur, basically. This is their logo. King David would not have seen the one that's on the screen. The reason being, this was about 150 years after King David. This is as the city had been rebuilt. But what we found last summer was this. So this was June last year. And my hair goes grey, by the way, when we switch the pictures, because the other one was a few years ago now. So as I move on, my hair goes grey. This is a much older stela. This stela is 3,000 years old, and this one has the same kind of image on it. It's got the same horns. It's a bull creature, and it's got a little kind of decorative flower to one side of it as well. And it's this bull image that is an image associated with the kingdom of Geshur. What you're looking at on the screen is the stela from the gateway at the time of King David. So last summer, not only have we identified the gateway that was functioning at the time David was alive, we identified it as the kingdom of Geshur because it fits with the sequence that will follow on in the centuries that will follow. And that means, and I'm going to stop on this note, that means wait and see what's yet to be found. Now we've got the gateway, we know the dating, and we're going to start going in and exposing the city as it was at the time of King David. David married the daughter of the king of Geshur. Absalom spent 2 years there. And we have got, and we know in terms of the actual dating, we've got the road that they would have walked on. We're going to get to the rooms, the foundations of the rooms where they would have lived. And that's why archaeology is a moving target. More and more emerges as every year goes by. And I've compressed a few things that I've shared with you tonight as I draw to an end on this stage. But I tell you, every year, my PowerPoint slides get more and more bloated as there is more and more information to share with you.